Okay, can you see that?
Yeah, looking good.
Good. Okay, let's get started then. Morning, everybody. Thank you for coming today. I'm Victoria Mitchell. I'm a delivery lead. My colleague Fiona and I've been working on this alpha, and Fiona will introduce herself later on. So we've come to the end of the alpha, and in this show and tell today we're going to cover the whole of the service assessments alpha. We've done a few show and tells which have covered the individual aspects, but this is the whole thing now altogether. Excuse me. So we'll talk through the work on the experiments, and then we should have plenty of time for chat and questions at the end. So let's start at the start. So because we're covering the complete alpha, we're not taking, I suppose, more of a traditional approach to walking you through it sequentially, because frankly, that would take too long and probably isn't the best use of your time. But what we are going to do is bring you on the journey of the work that we've done and stopping at some key points along the way, and show how we've arrived at the recommendations that we'll talk you through today. But we are going to publish a blog post that covers the specific learnings in more depth. So look out for that if you are interested. You might be wondering what the squiggly line is. That's a bit of a visual representation of our alpha journey, where we started. When we started, we thought we knew what we needed to do, and then we've got a pretty straight line there. And then we did some research with users, and obviously they told us something different. So then it all got a little bit squiggly and went backwards a little bit, but not too much. And then in order to go forwards, but by the end, we've got a clear way forward, just not what we thought at the start. So first, a bit of context for some of you who perhaps aren't familiar with the work that we're doing. So the service assessments team as a whole is focused on delivering the current mission, which is to create a service that helps teams to build good digital services that align with the digital service standard for Wales, and that supports senior responsible officers to make informed, risk-based decisions on whether to proceed, pause or stop delivery of products, services and projects. And our work has been separated into two streams of delivery. So stream one, which is the work that we're talking about today, the alpha work, is focusing on shaping a future all Wales service assessment offer. And stream two is working with teams primarily in Welsh Government to actually assess those services. The goal for stream two is to assess 6 of those services by the end of this financial year. Coming back to stream one, it's got 3 goals to achieve, and first was to design a model. So what does the future model for service assessments, what should that be? To know how to operate that model, and then finally to identify and upskill a network of service assessors for Wales. But actually, it's pretty challenging to deliver on the vision and the mission right now, because the digital service standard itself is not yet embedded. So to set us up for the alpha, we took a look at the existing service assessment offer from CDPS. It's very new, very much in its infancy, but here's the current journey to assessment. And in this journey, assessment means something similar to the UK Gov model, where the service team prepares some artifacts, explains the status and rationale for key decisions to an expert panel, and the panel creates a report with recommendations. 3 of those have been undertaken, 2 with Stats Wales and 1 with Natural Resources Wales, but it's still really early days. So we use the insights from those assessments, plus assumptions that had been made from previous work, and we shaped an alpha that highlighted 3 key areas. We started by thinking about how to operationalise the existing service, and we were aiming to create an end-to-end version of a future service offer, including a clear place to find and enter that assessment service, so that by the end of the alpha, we would know how the service could be operated with a small number of organisations in a private beta. I just want to say at this point that there's a lot that's already known about service assessments, not least all the previous work that's been done by central government. It's not new, we know this, and we're not aiming to relearn things, but rather to centre an offer around the specific and some unique needs of Wales, and reuse as much of what has been tested and validated previously to create that end-to-end service. But for this alpha, we took an experiment-based approach, and we did 3 experiments in 12 weeks. The goal of the experiments was to understand what the specific end-to-end assessment service should be, how it should be operated, and who is needed to deliver and support a service effectively and safely. Hypothesis 1 suggests that if CDPS provides an assessment offer, then teams will sign up because they're looking for that reassurance that they're designing services in the right way. Hypothesis 2 assumes that providing an assessment offer which aligns to the delivery phases that people are using will have the desired outcome of driving adoption of the service standard. And we thought that the goal of meeting the standard would be motivation enough. And then number 3, so whatever the future service assessment offer is, there is a need for a cohort of suitable assessors. So number 3 was looking at the skill set and how a pool of assessors could be created and expanded sufficient to meet potential demand. So a bit about the breadth and depth of the alpha and who we worked with. We made really pleased with the number of people that we were actually able to speak with and contact in the end. Had a few worries about that right at the start, but it turned out well. And we were really able to get a good breadth of representation from across different sectors and also levels within organisations. We've been working with many of you, and I wanted to thank you for engaging with this piece of work. It's been really invaluable. And whatever happens next after this alpha, we'd appreciate your continued support working with us to develop further. And at this point, I just want to do a shout out to Andrew Arrowsmith, who helped us grapple with some of the tools that we use to recruit people for research, and then also helping us to actually identify people that we could research with. So thanks, Andrew. Again, really big help. Other factors that shaped our thinking for the alpha were our design principles. And I've already talked about using what has already been learned in an appropriate way. So we can learn from the UK and apply it to Wales. But it's not the right approach to just directly copy because we're working in a different context. And importantly, this service must itself be an exemplar of the service standard and meet the digital service standard. So a bit more about that, and what you're looking at here is a visual which shows a comparison of the digital service standard for Wales and the UK Gov service standard. Now, some of you might not know that they are 2 different things and that there is a separate one for Wales. So I took a look at them to see how they align and how they differ. The boxes in green are the Wales version, and the boxes in purple, the UK. The obvious answer to service assessments might appear to be follow the UK model, but it's not that simple. If we look at the standard itself, what this analysis tells us is that there are many areas where the standard overlaps or even duplicates, but they're not directly like for like, and it's not just in the Welsh language or the future generations standards themselves where they differ. So there are 3 significant areas that are covered in the UK standard but don't appear in the Wales standard, and they're down here on the left-hand side in the purple boxes. So if we just took that approach of embedding the UK model and using UK assessors for Wales, then they've been trained to assess against the 14 UK version. So that gap needs to be addressed. 3 standards exist in the Wales standard, but not in the UK version. So having an empowered service owner doesn't specifically appear in the UK standard. Actually, sorry, it's 4 standards, not 3, where it does in the Wales version. Number 12, which focuses on using data to make decisions, doesn't appear as a standalone item in the UK version. It's there to some extent, included in one of the standards, but it's kind of more implied than explicit. And again, you know, UK service assessors would probably exclude these from their assessment approach. And 2 of the standards, numbers 1 and 2, are what makes Wales unique. And again, that would need to be addressed in any model. So in conclusion, when doing this analysis, operating something which could be part UK, part Wales specific as an approach would seem quite odd and burdensome, I think, from a user's perspective, and it would be challenging to create a seamless service in that context, likely confusing for assessees and assessors. So such a service would be unlikely to meet the standard itself. So let's dig deeper into the other work that we've done. So coming back to the existing service assessment offer and the user journey, we mapped that out and analysed the current situation and what we knew from the assessments that had already happened. And we highlighted areas of focus for improvement within that journey. So as I said earlier, it's still in its infancy and there's a lot to figure out, but there are clear signs already for improvement. So right at the start, signing people up. The way that's currently done is quite speculative, takes a lot of effort, and it doesn't yield very good results. And it relies quite heavily on senior leaders to identify and persuade teams to participate and sign up and agree to have an assessment. When it comes to preparing for an actual assessment, again, pretty high effort because teams don't know what to prepare for the assessment, and often they're preparing new material specifically for the assessment. And then the assessment itself, it's currently a 4-hour session, or in other words, half day, and that's a lot. That's a long time for both attendees and assessors themselves, and they told us that. Preparing the report, so once the assessment has been done, there's a lot of effort involved in consolidating recommendations and then preparing the written report itself. And then at the end, post-assessment, it's unclear what happens next and CDPS's role within that. So with those things in mind, we created 5 problem statements to focus the experiments around. So they were, how do we make it easier to get teams to sign up? How might we complete the end-to-end journey? How might we make it easier to prepare for an assessment? How might we reduce the effort needed to assess? And how might we increase users' confidence to try a service assessment? So I'm going to go through each one of those in more detail and share with you a bit about what we learned about it. So as I said, so number 1, how might we make it easier to get teams to sign up? And I said that the current model is high effort and has fairly low uptake although we're currently in contact with 7 teams to do possibly do service assessment with them, and we think that we can get 2 of those done by the end of this year. But the current approach relies quite heavily on senior leaders to identify and persuade teams to participate, and that's just not scalable. So thinking ahead to an all Wales offer, it just couldn't be scaled. And also, it's not easy to find information about service assessments in Wales. So if a team was thinking about service assessments and what's available to us, if you Google service assessments in Wales, the results don't lead to a clear destination for users. So we wanted to create an easy way for teams to discover the service, know what's involved in an assessment, and decide whether to proceed with one, sign up for one. So in our first experiment, we created prototypes of a series of web pages on the CDPS website, where we explored what content was needed around describing the offer so that people could understand the purpose and value of assessments, and then be incentivized to contact CDPS to request an assessment. And our new content tested really well with users, as did having an online form, which they would use to schedule. And you can see, I've just highlighted in the red box there, the call to action, really clear call to action, which is not a surprise. I mean, we know about, having clear call to actions. So not a surprise that a clear call to action yielded a good result, but it was still good to validate that anyway. We also heard a few times about people's experiences with service assessments in the past, perhaps at earlier points in their careers. And they talked about feeling scared and judged. One person did actually use the word trauma, and that was demotivating. So when I said earlier that there are things to learn from what's already been done, this is an example where it's not the right thing just to repeat perhaps the early days of assessments in the UK. And one thing that came across really loud and clear in all of our experiments that we did in this alpha was that assessors, there's a clear expectation that any assessors involved would be independent and would be supportive. Number 2 then, how might we complete the end-to-end journey? Okay, so service assessments are seen as beneficial for ensuring consistency and quality, and they help identify gaps and provide recommendations for improvement. But what should happen after a service assessment is unclear. People we researched with thought that a leader from within their own organisation would be responsible for actioning the recommendations. And some people thought that CDPS should be involved in some way, for example, to hold SROs to account for taking action on the recommendation, but there wasn't a consensus on that. Number 3, how might we make it easier to prepare for an assessment? So during our research, concerns were raised about what to prepare and the expected time burden of preparing and also the assessment itself. So the kinds of things that people talked about were being ready for a service assessment and the effort that it would take to prepare, the time a service assessment would take. So we said currently it's 4 hours. And then the value of actually doing that. One person described it as quite a one-way, the 4-hour session, quite a one-way knowledge transfer to an expert panel, which they didn't get a lot of value out of. So that's something to consider. Number 4, how might we make it easier to run assessments? And it wasn't just teams being assessed that had concerns about capacity. Concerns were also raised about having enough service assessor and administrative capacity to meet any potential demand. You know that any service assessment offer can't be scaled without having a pool of suitably skilled and experienced assessors. And it's not immediately obvious where those people would come from. So in experiment 3, we highlighted 2 key questions. Number one, what does a service assessor look like for Wales? And who do you need as an assessor to make that credible? We used a service assessor guide that had already been created and was being used, and it describes what a service assessor does and the qualities that are needed to be an assessor. And we asked a panel of people working in public sector teams a series of questions about assessor skills and qualities after they had read the guide. Lack of capacity to learn something new was a significant barrier, probably the highest barrier. And to a lesser extent, a belief that only someone in a defined DDAT role could be an assessor. But actually, both of these things feel solvable if the support is present at leadership level to implement service assessments. And neither of those things were a surprise. What was a surprise when we did the survey was the number of people that said they would apply to be an assessor after they'd read the guide, which you can see here. That's because the guide focuses on the qualities to be an assessor first, and people responded overwhelmingly positively to those. The qualities are highlighted there in the red box. So positive headline. But when it came to talking about the experience needed to be an assessor, we heard far more people say it's something that they would need to work towards, and they felt that they're not yet ready to be an assessor. And the answer to that is not simply to train people into being assessors. The value of an assessor comes from their lived experiences through delivery of products and services. So the last opportunity here, so how might we increase users' confidence to try a service assessment? So there was strong interest in a supportive, peer-led external review to support alignment with the standard. We heard specific things like service team members expressing a need for a clear checklist to self-review against digital standard for Wales. There was a desire to view examples of what does good look like. Self-led reviews were thought to ease fears and lower the barrier to engagement, and only a small number of teams currently aligns well with the standards and are probably ready for a more in-depth assessment itself. So in working through these things, it became clear that service assessments themselves won't address a fundamental user need. And that is that the service standard isn't embedded in teams. Because teams aren't using the service standard, they don't know how to apply it. And finding people with lived experience to be assessors and support a service that is scaled across Wales would be pretty challenging to do right now. So we can't jump straight to service assessments for the majority of teams. So where does that leave us? So Fiona is going to talk through that.
Hello, I'm Fiona. I'm a content designer by trade, but I've got service design and designer skills in my toolkit, shall we say. So I've been helping Vic out with this piece of work. So just to recap, we thought we needed to operationalise the current service assessment offer so that it could scale. And Vic talked you through some of the areas that we explored initially. And now we're entering into the squiggly bit, where our alpha journey started to veer away from the plan. And it wasn't what we expected, but it's kind of what you expect with an alpha to have those twists and turns. So our research uncovered this fundamental user need. I need a better understanding of the digital service standard for Wales so that I can work towards meeting the standard. And this one is fundamental because it not only affects why teams may be reluctant to participate in the service assessment, but also why finding assessors to scale the service could be challenging. And there was clear evidence of awareness of the digital service standard, but people didn't know how to meet it. They were looking for something that was clear and direct and helped them to understand what exactly they needed to do. And research participants told us they wanted a checklist to know conclusively what good looks like, access to support and services, and feedback early in the product/project lifecycle. But all of these are just ways to make the standard more accessible. So instead of doing the experiment we planned, we decided to do research that followed what the users were telling us. So we came up with this two-stage service assessment. It included a self-led checklist, which we suggested teams would use in the design phase, and so they would get their feedback early. We then thought that they would work on the results over the next couple of phases before they got to the testing phase. And at this point, they would have the panel review. So the service assessment was a checklist and a panel review. And that panel review came much later, around the testing phase, when other teams would be testing things themselves. And we designed 3 prototypes in Figma, quite high fidelity, to allow the participants to experience the checklist. We went through the service standard bit by bit, and we created questions for each section. And there were 56 questions in total. And then at the end, they were able to read an outcome of the checklist, and this was pre-designed, so we just made up some results for them to look at, but it gave them a good idea of what they could get back. And then we created a web page that talked about this 2-stage approach to service assessments. What we learned from this led us to 5 recommendations. So in the second round of research, there was still plenty of evidence to support that fundamental user need. So basically, the headline recommendation was that the focus should be on supporting teams to embed the digital service standard into the way of working. And our recommendations are to create a checklist tool and make it available to teams, to design user journeys that point to existing resources, build a strategy to champion the standard at leadership level across organisations in Wales, refocus effort to supporting teams rather than assessing their work, and create a relevant independent panel review. And I'll now explain how we got to those recommendations. So as part of the research, we asked the participants to rate the value of using the checklist using a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 was not valuable and 5 was extremely valuable. And you can see the individual scores there, but participants were largely positive about the checklist, and they explained the different ways that they would use it. They talked about it helping to raise awareness of best practice, get a shared understanding for how to work, shape the product design and project direction, measure quality consistently, and communicate quality to leaders. And this was another point where users led us in a different direction, because as you remember, we talked about this 2-stage process where we had the checklist, and we assumed that people would use it once, work on the results, and then go for the panel review. But people said that they would use the checklist multiple times during their delivery cycle. And there was this idea of reinforcement and reflection that emerged. So at an earlier stage, and again, it was even earlier than we thought, so we were wrong on that, they'd use it to reinforce how teams should be working. So they'd go through the checklist and expect there to be lots of no's, but have a good idea of where they needed to improve. And then for the reflection side, they said that they could use it potentially in retros or at stage gates to work out how closely they were aligning on an ongoing basis. So the second recommendation was to design user journeys that point to existing support. So when we asked participants to rate their ability to act on the recommendations from completing the checklist, again using a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 was completely unable and 5 was extremely able, the scores are a bit lower here, and participants had mixed attitudes because what they needed was to know how to achieve the standard. So the checklist told them what, but then they wanted to know what good looks like, what the techniques were to actually do the work. And so for the recommendation here, what we're saying is that the checklist shouldn't be just a checklist on its own. It needs to be part of an integrated ecosystem of support with things like the service manual that already exists, other learning offers, and the digital sharing hub. So recommendation 3 is about championing the standards at leadership level across Wales. So we think that CDPS could play a role in supporting service teams by raising awareness of the importance of meeting the digital service standard. We heard a familiar story about time pressure and money pressure, and teams were prioritising what they had to do, what was mandated, so accessibility and Welsh language. Meeting the standards isn't mandated, so where meeting them creates more work, they're unlikely to get prioritised. And some of the standards would need a big shift in how the team works. So by championing the importance of it, it means that when teams start to ask for the resources, the doors should open a bit more to allow them to be able to do the work to meet the standard. So that would be taking a bit of a top-down approach. One other thing to focus on is the need for an engaged stakeholder group, which this alpha work has been missing up till now. We think that the standards board, being a cross-section of leaders from across Wales, is well positioned to champion and embed the standards into their own organisations across Wales. So recommendation 4 is about refocusing to supporting teams rather than assessing their work. And what we found was the majority of teams we spoke to didn't actually have control of the end-to-end of their service. So assessing a service team on the whole service doesn't really work. But what we did find were that some teams are empowered within their part of the delivery process. So this isn't really about digital maturity of the organisation. It's about those individuals and teams who feel they have some control and want to do good work. So this is where CDPS can work with those teams directly and help them to get over whatever opportunities they've identified. So it means also taking a bottom-up approach. And the final recommendation was to co-create relevant independent panel reviews. So we know that there are some teams who will be ready for the current GDS style of service assessment, but a lot of them aren't ready. And those can continue for those that want them, but if we did want to scale it, we might need to adapt the approach. So our recommendation here is to work with the teams to find out what their needs are and co-create panel reviews that really work for them. So our alpha journey was probably exactly what a alpha journey needed to be. Testing and finding out early what the right path should be. So we now have a lot more confidence in how service assessments should move forward. It starts with focusing on supporting teams to embed the digital service standard into their way of working. It's about meeting people where they are and then building towards more formal service assessments down the line. So now we want to hear from you. That's our story, and we'd love to know how you feel about an approach that focuses on embedding the standards. We've got a Menti here, and you can use your phone or computer. I'll hand over to Gemma to take you through it.
Diolch. Bore da pawb. So yeah, if you can go either on your laptop or on your phone, I'm going to present and then we'll see these results coming in live, which is exciting. Let's have a little look. Share my screen. Mentimeter. Okay, so we've got 16 people at the moment, 5 responses out of those 16, and we've got Allo checking the Welsh. We got any coming through on Welsh, Allo? Oh, diolch. Okay, lovely. Okay, so that's good to hear that people are very interested in an approach that focuses on supporting you to embed the standard. Got 14 out of 20 people joined now. Really, really interesting. And the next question is, what do you think would help you to embed the standard into your own teams? So, leadership we've got leadership in Welsh. We've got early engagement, experts to call, clear framework, checklist. Really interesting. I love this live feedback. It's so interesting to see coming on screen. You're like, wow, the checklist is coming out strong. So the more you use certain words, the bigger the word is. Understanding user needs, a clear framework. Brilliant. Okay, we've got 3 more questions, and we can open it up then for a discussion. So how useful do you think a checklist might be for your team? Not useful, very useful. So I don't know what people's thoughts are there. And we've got, very useful in Welsh. Diolch for the Welsh responses as well. 14 out of 22 people responded so far. Got more people coming through. Again, really interesting. And then we've got some open-ended questions as well. So what would make a checklist most helpful for you? What are your thoughts, Vic and Fiona? Any? Okay. Adaptable examples. Knowing the bare minimum.
I'm interested in that an adaptable checklist. Again, that's not that one, that didn't come up in the research. But that's an interesting because the standards are the standard is set. So what level of adaptability are people thinking for that?
That's required. Yeah, if anyone wants to come off mute to, talk about what they've put in, that'd be really helpful. And again, we can open it up for a discussion.
Well, and just on there, I think somebody's put something, evidence required. I think that's really interesting because the checklist is self-led, so it's down to you and your team or to decide whether you are doing the work or not. So there's really no point in cheating. I mean, you could tick yes for everything, but what's the point in that? It's really supposed to be a tool to help you learn, and then as you get more confident, you'll be ready for the service assessment to be able to just have one of those and get it externally reviewed and get more support that way.
And when did you want to come in?
Yeah, so I wrote definitely evidence suggestions. So I don't think it's about cheating. I think it's about how can we assure ourselves, right? What would be considered evidence of that? What could we point to say that we are doing whichever element of.
Have you got any thoughts on that, Anwen? Because as Fiona said, the idea is that the checklist being the first stage in the process and that being self-led. And we as CDPS can make some suggestions about how you might evidence that, but ultimately, because it would be the team themselves or the organisation themselves using that tool, I guess in terms of the right or the appropriate evidence, as it were, needs to come from the teams themselves. So you could
100%.
point.
But you can see it on your screen. Examples, evidence,
yes, exactly.
Evidence suggestions, evidence-based examples, right? We need something to benchmark maybe against.
Yeah, and I think we definitely heard that too in our research. So it's something, people want to know, what are other people doing? What does good look like as well? So not just examples, but examples of what is felt to be good practice too. So that's definitely something that would be part of future work on this as well.
And I also think because we did hear that people were going to use the checklist in different ways. So for those ways when you're sort of communicating with leadership, for example, being able to show them as well as tell them that you've done the right thing would be useful. And that might be a circular thing. When teams have done that, they can then share that more, working in the open, share that more widely, and then other teams can learn from that. So it could be something that's really collaborative with everybody who gets involved with using it.
Could we come back to, I think there was somebody that put there about an adaptable checklist. If you feel comfortable, would you mind just sharing a bit more about what the thinking there, in kind of what ways would it need to adapt? No, someone's feeling shy. Does anybody else kind of feel that ability for the checklist itself to adapt would be an important thing, and in what ways it might need to adapt?
We did hear in the research people saying that instead of maybe a yes/no kind of checklist, they'd prefer a scale, for example. That's one of the ways that it could be used.
Yeah, so they felt that having a number rather than yes/no, like having a number, so maybe a 1 to 5, where if you were going to use the checklist or repeatedly use the checklist, because it's got a number attached to it, you could see any progression or regression equally in specific areas, and for that to be a measurable thing as well. So that's something that we definitely heard, and perhaps something to consider if the checklist itself moves forward. Okay, I'm just going to take us back to, thank you everybody. Is there one more question, Jem? Yeah, there we go. So, what, if anything, makes it difficult to find, access, or use the current resources that are available to you that supports use of the digital service standard.
Yeah, that individual versus organisation thing keeps coming up, doesn't it? Where like one person or one team knows about it, but people outside of that don't. So they always hit a barrier when they're like, oh, well, we need to work iteratively on this. We can't just throw it over to the devs and get it done. Like, oh, we don't work that way. So no. Oh.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've had a response in Welsh as well about the lack of prioritisation by organisation leadership teams. So again, you know, is that leadership sort of like area again? Like, but again, are leaders aware of the digital service standard? So it comes back to that. And then also someone's put that, you know, these sort of events. So we promote the digital service standard at our events, and a lot of our events are usually in Cardiff, although we are trying to address that, and we are trying to move around Wales. But yeah, I just thought I'd highlight the responses we've had in Cymraeg.
Thanks, Gemma. And we can see here, obviously, in these responses too, awareness is appearing a few times. Yeah. So I am kind of assuming from that people generally don't know what's available to them, which is interesting. So clear action for CDPS there to improve on that. Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay, I've got one more. Complex duty operational structures. Yeah, very much so. Actually, and we heard that. We heard that definitely in our research. There's so many different factors to take into account, isn't there? And that's definitely one of them. Lack of it being a board level requirement, yeah. So this is where that we think that there's a standard board, which you may also have not known about. They meet once a month, I think it is. They are a cross section of leaders from across Wales. So it includes Glyn Jones, who is Chief Digital Officer for Welsh Government, but it also includes some of the like heads of digital or digital chief digital officers for some of your organisations as well. So Public Health Wales, for example, it's a really good cross section of senior leaders, and so we think that they're pretty fundamental, critical even, to whatever is available in terms of assessments, checklists, resources, support, training, to helping embed any of that within their own organisations. I presented to them, I think it was a couple of weeks ago now, some early insights on this alpha work, and I think we're going to just keep going back until we can figure out what the best way in which we can use that group of people to help get the standard embedded, and also make sure that people are aware of any assessment checklist or any of the support resources as well. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I am going to take back control. And because we are wrapping up now, let's see if I can get to the point in the presentation and not have to start from the very beginning. Okay, it's telling me I can't display the content, so I'm just going to say it. That's fine. As I said, the alpha work's been missing a clear steer from an engaged body of stakeholders, and at times it's not been clear who this work is for, nor whether it's a priority. So the standards board, pretty critical to that. And finally, although you can't see the slide, I'm just going to have to describe it. What's next? This alpha is finished. It's done. we've done 12 weeks worth of work, we've done the 3 experiments, we've got some clear recommendations, but how should embedding the standard and the user journey that is led by using tools and resources sit alongside formal service assessments so that teams can choose the right path for them? Well, in the next few weeks, Fiona and I are going to be doing some additional work on creating those user journeys and visualizing exactly that, so it's really clear. And then it's over to the leadership team at CDPS and also Welsh Government to decide which of the recommendations to prioritise and move forwards with. And that's it from us. So thank you very much for taking part in the Menti. Thank you for attending today. Before we wrap up, are there any final questions about the Alpha work? Perhaps is there anything that we need to clarify for you? We'll just give you, we've got a few minutes if there are any. Robert, yes.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm just wondering if you see a role for independent consultants to support organisations on their sort of journey to meet the standard and then maybe future assessments. Will there be a mechanism to sort of apply to be an accredited assessor, for example, to help organisations with that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, that potentially could be another way to scale, couldn't it, and access the assessor, kind of that experienced assessor population. We didn't explore that specifically within this Alpha, so it's not something that we can evidence from our Alpha, but if there was sufficient demand and there was still not a significant assessor population available, then it is kind of a natural path, isn't it, to look at who else could support.
It's just that some of the evidence there talked about organisations struggling with lived experience. So although it's unlikely that any one person would have in-depth experience in all of the range of areas the standard covers, SMEs and specific consultants could add quite a lot in specific areas. So I think that's a good way to go, and it would help with knowledge gaps and experience gaps in organisations if they're trying to do the right thing. So yeah, something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for that. I completely agree. I mean, who knows? Let's see where that ends up. But it's it makes sense in many ways. Anybody else? Harriet.
Thanks, Vic, and Fiona. That was such a clear kind of run through of the work that you've done and the evidence that you've gathered and your recommendations based on the evidence. And I think, that's the point of this work, is to give us the evidence and the data and the user feedback to be able to plan the most effective use of resource around this assessment question. It's been really interesting to hear what people think and what people want, and I think now that we have that evidence and we have your recommendations, the next stage is to work out, okay, how do we act on them? What are our practical steps? But there's some really clear indication of the requirements of users. And I think another point that you've made really clearly is that the support available isn't as well understood or accessible as it needs to be. And that is absolutely work that we are engaged in, because we have a lot of support assets. But I think probably, certainly designing a user journey around how you access them and how you find what you need at the point when you need it is work to be done as we continue to develop those assets. But yeah, you've given us the evidence that we need to take our next steps. And so, yeah, just very grateful for such a professional piece of work. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who supported you, because we can only gather this evidence from users. And so if there are people on this call who helped us to gather these insights, thanks to them too.
Yeah, very much so. Thanks, Harriet. Okay, I think that's a good place to end it. So once again, thank you very much for joining us today. As I said, we are writing a blog post, so that will go out and it will support these slides. So look out for that if you want to kind of understand a bit more. That's it. Thanks very much, everybody.